This is Chris Lee of Southeastern 14, presented by the Bearded Iris Brewing Company. We're here to do awards for SEC baseball. That's right. The regular season has ended. Hoover is upon us. We got lots of awards to hand out. We're doing 4 teams because that's what we do here at the 14. We go deep on the SEC. We do our homework. You may not agree with it all, but you will see why we made our picks the way we made them. And of course, it's SEC baseball. It's awards time. We got to dress up. We spare no expense here at Southeastern 14, as you can see. So with that, let's get right into the awards. I'm going to try to do this screen thing where you can see my work without any help, so let's hope this works. Anyway, let's dive right into it. And here we go. We're going to start with our 4th team. And again, we pick 4 teams. And you're going to see several things on our screen here. The ARC column, that is an estimated number of runs a player created for his team. It's based on a formula that Bill James made several years ago, and it is adjusted for the number of runs the team actually scored. It's an estimate, but it's a pretty good estimate. And then to the right of that is the number of runs a player created per 27 outs. And then to the right of that is a player's SEC stat line. Now, the first 2 columns are just in all games, and then the third one in SEC only play, which weighs heavily in this because, hey, if you're trying to be the best team in the conference, you got to play well in the conference. And so this explains a lot of what you will see. You may see some guys on this team and go, hey, how is my guy not higher here? And you'll see as we go further. As your math teacher told you, show your work. We're showing our work here so you can see some of the basis for our decisions as we did what we did. And then in the bottom, that's ERA, base runners per innings pitched, and innings pitched in all games, followed by SEC ERA and innings pitched. And then to the far right on the pitchers is free pass rate. That's percentage of batters you walk or hit, followed by percentage of batters you strike out, followed by what percentage of the time you give up home runs. So those are the 3 things that pitchers allegedly can or can't control. So goes conventional wisdom these days, and so we put that on there. But anyway, if you go to the top, I've got Devin Burks at Kentucky as our 4th team catcher. Had a nice season, didn't really hit for a lot of power, but got on base a lot and played a lot of innings behind the plate for the Cats. Moving down the lineup, Henry Zeisler at Missouri had a nice unnoticed year. I think that's what happens when you play in Missouri. Christian Moore of Tennessee had a really nice offensive year. The defense lagged a bit. And then you go down, you look, we've got the all-Arkansas outfield. And yes, I know Kendall Diggs played a lot of DH, but the bat was so good when he played, and he did play some outfield that we put him in there. Arkansas fans may be griping a little bit at this point, going, hey, how do we have 3 4th-team outfielders? How are these guys not ranked higher? Well, here you go. Arkansas had some injuries this year, especially to Josenberger and Wagner. And look, those are kids that if they played out the full season, the production might have been better. In fact, Wagner, had he played at that level that he played at all year, might well have been a first-team guy, although the numbers in the SEC plays you can see over here suffered a little bit, and so that counted too. But Jared Wagner was just phenomenal when he was healthy. He missed, maybe a quarter of the season, and when he came back, he had that thumb issue. I'm guessing he wasn't 100% right out of the gate, and that hurt. So again, Jared Wagner, when he played, had a better season than that. But you got to be able to reward people for an entire season. There are kids who played at a high level all season, and so I'm not trying to slight anybody here. That's just the way it works is when you miss a quarter of the season or whatever it was in Wagner's case, that dings you a little bit here, just to be fair to everybody. Ike Irish is our utility guy for Auburn, had a fantastic freshman year, was I think mostly their DH in conference play, but did catch some this year, which adds a little bit of value. And maybe I guess I could have put Irish as my catcher and Burks as my DH, but Burks played, I think, a lot more behind the plate in the league. Okay, going down to the pitching, Hunter Holland of Arkansas tailed off late, and that base runners number is a little bit ugly, but he was fairly effective. And you look at the SEC ERA, 4.88, that's not that great. Usually But my goodness, it was that kind of year in the SEC where nobody could get anybody out because of the conditions that we have with offense. Chase Dollander for Tennessee probably pitched a little bit better than the numbers showed. Didn't give up a ton of runners comparatively, but that ERA was kind of high. Had some issue keeping the ball in the park, which happens when you pitch in Knoxville. Brandon Sprode, a kid for Florida that was kind of uneven. Some weeks it was great. Some weeks it was not so great. And what on balance that made out to was a fourth team All-SEC honor, at least in my opinion. Had some trouble keeping the ball in the park too. But again, a lot of balls got out of the yard there in Gainesville. Mason Moore at Kentucky was kind of an underrated swing guy. That should be 27.1 for SEC innings pitched. If he pitched 271 innings with that ERA, we would have had him a lot higher, trust me. But was a ground ball-oriented guy, not really a dominant reliever, but he was recruited, I think, and placed in a role to do what he did, which was keep the ball on the ground, which he did very well, keep it in the park, which he did very well. He pitched a lot of innings and pitched pretty well. And so he made our fourth team as a reliever. Another guy, Jim Jarvis of Alabama, just a steady shortstop. When the ball's hit to him, you can trust him to know what to do with it. That counts for something. And Colby Shelton in Alabama had a tremendous year too in a pretty competitive third base market. The third team, you can see some Auburn representation on here. Bryson Ware and Cole Foster both had tremendous years. Again, I said third base was fairly competitive. Ware had one of the better offensive years in the league. He and Foster both really slugged it in SEC play. BT Riopelle at Florida, not a great year for defensive catchers. And this is one of the odder stat lines you'll see. A kid hitting 215 in SEC play, but he walks a ton, which is why he had a 408 on-base percentage. Jack Moss of Texas A&M, just a consistent player. Had close to the year he had a year ago. Cade Curlin, the freshman second baseman, joins Riopelle on our second team. Kemp Alderman for Ole Miss had a terrific offensive year. Jace Borfin had a really nice year for Arkansas. Jace Lavalette for Texas A&M had a tremendous freshman year. Look at that slugging percentage, 835 in the league. Connor Tate at Georgia had a nice year, tailed off a little bit in league play, but the second straight year he's been an elite hitter for the Bulldogs. And then you get down to the pitching. Tommy Vale had a really nice year, had a bunch of nice starts. I might could have put him higher, but this hurt him a little bit. You had some guys that had better numbers, got rocked a start or two in the SEC and maybe paid the price for that a little bit. Luke Holman at Alabama had a really nice year too. Really came on late. Jack Mahoney at South Carolina had a nice year for the Gamecocks in a park that gives up some home runs at times. And Brandon Neely at Florida was our third team reliever. He had a nice year too. Got suspended that one weekend for kind of a bogus suspension in my mind and a lot of people's minds. But anyway, that's how it went. Brandon Neely ends up as our closer on our third team. The second team, Calvin Harris of Ole Miss leads it off as our catcher. You might see him on some first teams because of the offensive production. Tailed off a little bit in terms of getting on base in SEC play. Cooper McMurray at first was one that I had some issues maybe putting him this high. First base was super competitive and about that much separated a lot of these guys. But it was this number right here, that slash line in SEC play, a 469 on base percentage, a 750 slugging percentage. That kid really came through in the clutch for them late in the year where Auburn was working its way towards trying to get a regional. So I might have put Cooper McMurray too high for that reason, just because he didn't play as much as some other guys, but the SEC production was so overwhelmingly off the charts and meaningful that I've got him there. Gavin Dugas. Now, here's the odd stat line of the year. Hitting 200 in the league with a 425 on base percentage is really difficult to do, but that's what he did. Dugas was a very good second baseman in terms of the all-around game, including the hitting for a very powerful LSU lineup. Luke Mann of Missouri, one of the more underrated players in the league. If you want to really get ignored, put up good numbers at Missouri. That's a little bit of a tougher hitter's ballpark, and it's cold a lot of the year. I think the dimensions are a little bigger. So these numbers that Luke Mann put up, probably a little bit more impressive than what meets the eye based on the conditions he played in. Jacob Gonzalez, our second team shortstop, had a terrific year for an Ole Miss team that was just awful. Jackson Gray, this could have been the most underrated player in the league. I don't know how much people talked about Jackson Gray, but he manned center for Kentucky, had a 507 on base percentage in the league. That is incredible. A couple of Vandy outfielders here. R.J. Schreck, who was Vanderbilt's best offensive player and hit very well in the league, and Enrique Bradfield Jr., who actually hit better in the SEC than he did out of it. Bradfield is our weakest offensive outfielder in terms of the season he had, but my goodness, if you watch that kid play, I don't know if there's ever been a better defensive center fielder in the history of the SEC, at least not as far as I've seen. Going back 20 years, he took away so many home runs and extra base hits this year. It's so much easier to pitch when you have a center fielder who just locks it all down across the board. He is just an incredible defender. I think Enrique Bradfield Jr. Could play in the majors today and win a Gold Glove. I think that's how good of an outfielder he is defensively. Speaking of underrated players, this guy has been one for a couple of years in this league. That's Andrew Pinckney of Alabama, who manned, I believe, right field for them. Just put up a tremendous year in and outside of the league and has just been a rock for that team. We get to the second team pitching, and Devin Futrell probably would have been a first-teamer, but just had a bad last start or two that knocked his numbers down a little bit. The ERA was, I think, under 3 before that Arkansas start. But it's the body of work, and he paid the price for a last bad start. Also had a little bit of an issue keeping the ball in the park. He's a fly ball pitcher. Hunter Owen of Vanderbilt would have been a first-teamer had he stayed healthy, but he missed, I think, 3 or 4 starts. You can see he didn't throw a lot of innings in the SEC, but my goodness, when he did throw, he was outstanding. Jacob McNary, that should say of Alabama, not Arkansas. Pardon me there. Let's correct that on the screen as we do this. Jacob McNary had a really, really solid year, 3.39 ERA on the whole, pitched really well in the league, but just didn't throw quite enough innings due to sitting out for health reasons. Really was good with control. An 8% free pass rate is outstanding, kept the ball in the park. Those are things that you do as a pitcher that pay off. If you don't walk guys and you keep balls in the park, it's probably going to end well for you, and it did for Jacob McNary. Evan Aschenbach of A&M is our second-team reliever. The numbers weren't great on the whole, in a way, a 3.72 ERA, not elite, but look how many innings he pitched. Look how many he pitched in the league. There's a lot to be said for a guy who can just come in and give you 3 to 4 innings. I guess he averaged 4 innings a weekend out of the bullpen for an A&M team that really needed it. Again, he kept the ball in the park. He did not walk guys. Evan Aschenbach had a really, really nice year. And in terms of like a jumbo reliever, a guy who comes in and gives you multiple innings, maybe isn't always dominant, but can stretch things out and save a pitching staff, which in this era of college baseball is really, really meaningful. Evan Aschenbach did that better than anybody in the league this year. All right, our first team, Cole Messina of South Carolina. Not a great year for defensive catchers, and I know he played some third and didn't always play it well, but the bat was pretty loud. These two numbers were probably better than any catcher in the league, and he hit pretty well in league play. Charlie Condon, another guy that went kind of unnoticed because Georgia was not at the forefront of any conversations this year in terms of winning the East or winning the league, but I think that runs created number right there, that was maybe the second highest in the league. Just a phenomenal season for Charlie Condon. Emilian Petre at Kentucky. Some second basemen had better offensive numbers, but his fielding percentage was around 980. Second base, obviously a premium defensive position, a 467 on base mark in the league. That is outstanding. That is why he was our first team second baseman in what was a pretty crowded field there, where with offensive numbers, not a lot separated some of these guys, but his defense really stood out. Now, Tommy White was more of a DH than a third baseman, but they played him there. I think he fielded around 830, which is just dreadful, and that's probably going to make him a DH at the next level or maybe a corner outfielder, but there was no denying the bat when he played. The runs created numbers, the SEC numbers were all good. You would have liked to have seen a little bit higher on-base percentage in the league, maybe, but offensively, not a whole lot to knock for him on the whole. Josh Rivera at Florida had a tremendous season, got banged up a little bit late. He edges Jacob Gonzalez for our first team All-SEC honors at shortstop. Dylan Cruz of LSU was the best hitter in the league from start to finish. That runs created number for 27 outs was at 30 for a while. And he tailed off late because, look, you can't put up these numbers all year. And at some point, even the great Dylan Cruz has to come down to earth a little bit, which he did. But even when he did, he had built up enough of a lead to where he was a no-brainer first-team All-SEC guy. White Langford, too, another guy that got hurt a little bit, and I think the numbers just continued to get better. He was a big part of why Florida did what it did late in winning the SEC Eastern Division and tying with Arkansas for the overall lead. Ethan Petrie for South Carolina. The numbers tailed off a little bit late as that whole team just kind of hit a slump late. I think the injuries took a toll. Whatever the case was, Petrie wore down. It seemed like a little bit down the stretch. The power numbers dropped a little bit, but still good enough to earn a first-team All-SEC selection. And Jack Caglione was our DH/utility guy. The bat was phenomenal this year. I think he's leading the country in home runs or is very close. I haven't checked on that as we're doing this, but he was the country's leader in home runs a lot of the year. Now, where he gets knocked a little bit is on base. He doesn't walk at all, and that hurts you a little bit. And, of course, Caglione was a weekend guy for the Gators, too. It was ugly the first two-thirds of the year or three-quarters, but that got better. And just being able to throw innings in the SEC at a competent level has a lot of value. So he was a no-brainer for that DH/utility spot, given what he did offensively and the way he was able to pitch weekend innings. Okay, Paul Skeens of LSU. Of course, he was going to be our first team All-SEC pitcher. We'll get to him a little bit later, discuss the year he had. Let's discuss this now, actually. You look at how dominant these numbers are compared to everybody else. He had more innings pitched. He had base runners per innings pitched. Just phenomenal. Less than a runner per innings pitched. ERA under 2. SEC ERA great. Look at this, guys. He had a 5% free pass rate. 5% of all the hitters he faced got on base via a hit batsman or a walk. He struck out literally half the hitters he faced. That's incredible. I don't think I've ever seen that in the SEC. He kept the ball in the park. Whatever you needed Paul Skeens to do, stretch you out, keep the ball in the park, don't walk guys, pitch well in big games. He did it. Andrew Lindsey for Tennessee. And let me correct this. I think that was supposed to be 1.26 or 1.16. I think it was 1.16 now that I think about it. So the base runners per innings pitch were better than what I had on the screen here. Andrew Lindsey was one of the more underrated players in the league this year. He was not even a guy that was in the rotation to start league play. But Tony Vitello put him in there. He was their closer. And when he put him in there, boy, did he respond. In league play, he was probably the second best starting pitcher. Not an overpowering guy, as you can see here, but he doesn't issue a lot of walks or hit batsmen, and he keeps the ball in the yard, which is tough to do in Knoxville, as everybody knows. Hagen Smith for Arkansas. The production tailed off a little bit at times late, although I say that. He pitched great against Vandy in the final series. Hagen Smith, you'd like to see that control number a little bit better, but he struck out a lot of guys, also kept the ball in the park. On the whole, I think it's hard to argue that he was a first-team selection. And Nick Maldonado at Vanderbilt, that ERA is wrong. I think that's a 1.72. I don't know what was up with my math as I typed these in today. But you can see right on a Skeens level in terms of giving up base runners. Didn't throw a lot of innings. You could have held that against him, but the ones he threw were so dominant. You can see what he did in SEC play. You can see he does not walk guys. He strikes out a lot of guys. Had a little bit of an issue keeping the ball in the park. But again, that was kind of the year that it was. That was just tough for nearly everybody to do, and even at times Paul Skeens. All right, awards. Major awards. These are so major they get 3 exclamation points. Coach of the Year, Dave Van Horn at Arkansas. I think that was, well, all these selections, these two in particular, were very easy. Dave Van Horn as Coach of the Year was kind of a no-brainer. Not only did Arkansas tie for the SEC lead, but I don't think there was a team in the league that had more significant injuries than Arkansas. That entire outfield seemed like it got banged up at one point. Arkansas lost its middle infield at various points. Forgot to mention, I think John Bolton got hurt in that game one of the Vandy series. I didn't see him the rest of the weekend. Wasn't a great hitter, but a lot of what Arkansas does is building around defense, and losing him hurt. I think second base injuries were a factor. Well, certainly were, because Peyton Stovall is done for the year. Pitching injuries, man, we've gone over those all year. Not only did Arkansas overcome probably more than maybe any team in the league, but at the end of the day, ended up winning the West and sharing the league's overall lead. And so Dave Van Horn, I think, obviously your Coach of the Year. Now, here's a guy that I don't think gets enough credit. Nick Mingione of Kentucky. This is an era where it is really hard to win if you're one of those northernmost teams. And Kentucky, probably one of the two toughest jobs in the SEC, I would say, along with Missouri, to win. Your cold weather. You're not in a state that produces a ton of baseball talent, and you got states around you like Tennessee that can go get what you've got too. So, having said all that, Nick Mingione lost a ton of guys from last year's team. What did he do? I think, in my opinion, he moneyballed it. He said, what are the things that we can get in the portal that maybe get undervalued a little bit? And he went for defense. He went for a pitching staff that kept the ball in the park. It was not a flashy pitching staff. It didn't strike out a ton of guys, but it got ground balls. He had guys behind who could defend. He got a bunch of dudes that got on base. Kentucky did not hit a lot of home runs, but, man, up and down that lineup, those guys got on base. Nick Mingione, I think, rebuilt his entire lineup outside of one or two guys. And Kentucky is the number 2 team in the RPI. In my opinion, Kentucky should be hosting a regional. If not for the job that Dave Van Horn did, I think Nick Mingione would have been Coach of the Year in a lot of other years. But that did not happen this year, obviously, because Van Horn, what he did was exceptional. Butch Thompson at Auburn, I feel like we say this every year. Butch Thompson maybe did less with more than just about any coach in the year. Lost his number 1 starter almost from the jump. That's tough to recover from. Lost a lot of the heart of the order from last year. Lost the SEC Player of the Year from a year ago. Recovering from that, recovering from having your number 1 starter hurt. Auburn struggled a little bit for a while. I say struggled. That might not be the right way to put it. Auburn got better as the season went on, because Auburn did get series wins against Southern Cal and Indiana early. But with losing your number 1 starter and placing some big bats, that's a tough challenge at Auburn. Butch Thompson did it. I think Auburn should be hosting a regional. We'll see if that comes through. In a lot of ways, I could have gone for number 4. I could have gone Kevin O'Sullivan. I could have gone Mark Kingston, who was sort of Arkansas light, although the injuries kind of broke Carolina, whereas Arkansas figured out a way to get through. That may not be fair to Mark Kingston. I don't mean to say that anything disparaging about the job he did, but there were a lot of coaches that did great jobs. But Vanderbilt rebuilt a lot of its lineup too, and had injuries to its number 1 and number 2 starters that kept them out for about half of SEC play. Its midweek starter missed the entire year, yet Vanderbilt got 1 win in that Florida series. Then Vanderbilt would have been your overall SEC champ. Tim Corbin got that close despite some pitching injuries. This is a guy that, when the dust settles in a week, Vanderbilt is going to have the longest streak of NCAA tournament appearances of any team in the country, presuming Florida State does not win the ACC tournament. I think that counts for something. But these two guys here, Butch Thompson and Tim Corbin, and so does Dave Van Horn, and so does Nick Mingione. But these guys do incredible jobs year in and year out, and deserve to be recognized for that. Okay, Pitcher of the Year, Paul Skeens. That was easy for all the reasons you know. Considering the pitching conditions in this league, which were brutally tough, Paul Skeens might have had the best year of any pitcher I remember in some time. Not only did he have a great season statistically, he did it in a time where it was hard to pitch and was just head and shoulders above the next guy on that list, who was Andrew Lindsay. I think it says a little bit of something about the SEC this year that my number 2 pitcher of the year was a guy that wasn't even in the rotation till about halfway through SEC play. Lindsey was Tennessee's closer before he entered the rotation. And he didn't pitch as much maybe as you'd like to see a guy pitch that's at this level of pitcher of the year. But Andrew Lindsey, when he did throw on the weekends, was phenomenal. Again, in an environment and against a schedule that was not easy to pitch against, but he answered the bell almost every time he was out there on a Friday night. Hagen Smith at Arkansas, we went through him and Devin Futrell earlier. They both had some really nice years with a few warts here and there, but they, on balance, pitched very well, and I think are deserving of pitcher of the year consideration in most years where you don't have a Paul Skeens at the top of the list. Okay, player of the year. This ended up being closer than I might have thought originally. Dylan Cruz's numbers took a little bit hit late to where Wyatt Langford almost overcame him in terms of overall offensive production, but he didn't. Dylan Cruz also played center field and played it at a fairly high level. I don't think he made an error all year. So this wasn't really a tough decision to take Dylan Cruz as a player of the year, but maybe it got a little closer than I would have said. Jack Caglione, in terms of hitting, Langford was better, but there's a lot of value in being your team's third starter and eating innings the way that he did and actually pitched well at times. And Charlie Condon, fourth was a little tough, but Condon had a phenomenal year. And you'll see that get recognized. He was the freshman of the year. I know Petrie got most of the attention. Part of that was that hot start. Part of that was South Carolina being in that number 1 overall discussion for a while, but the numbers tailed off, and Condon actually had a better year offensively when the dust settled. Now, if I did park factors, which I'd love to find those somewhere, I can't find college baseball park factors anywhere. I would love to know how that settles out between Georgia and South Carolina, which was the more home run friendly ballpark, because I could change that based on some data that I just don't have. But anyway, these guys were really neck and neck for first place, and I went with Condon just because the production on the whole was better. Colby Shelton at Alabama. This was a really strong freshman class. Shelton hit 20 home runs. I could have put Ike Irish over him. I don't know if that was the right call or not. Irish did add some defensive value by being able to catch and hit at a high level. And Cade Curlin of Florida would be another guy that would have been in consideration there. Really, I don't think a lot of difference between Shelton, Irish, and Curlin when the dust settled, but you had to pick somehow, and I did. I'm sure I'm leaving out some freshmen. I'm sure there's somebody else that was good, but in my mind, these guys were the top ones this year. Watching us here at Southeastern 14. I'm your host, Chris Lee. We'll have more baseball content coming up later this week. We'll do regional projections. We'll probably either do some previews or recaps from Hoover. I'm going to be out of town, but I'll be following that from TV. We've got some family stuff going on the next week and a half. But I hope you enjoyed our awards. I sure enjoyed putting those together, put a lot of time on. And if there's an omission that you think somebody that should have been there that wasn't, put that in the comments, and I'll tell you why I did or why I didn't do what I do, or if I just missed somebody. Hey, when you got this many players in the league and you're picking 4 teams, it is possible that you just miss something every now and then. I might have done that. If you think I missed something, let me know, and I will address that in the comments. But anyway, if you hit the subscribe button, that costs you nothing. It's like a follow. If you hit the like button, that helps us too. Both those things really help our channel get noticed. They help us get sponsors. That helps me be able to pay the bills and do this. But in any case, I'm Chris Lee for Southeastern 14, presented by the Bearded Iris Brewing Company. The Sylvan Supply location in Nashville is home to Black Dynasty's Secret Ramen House. You'll find a wide variety of comforting bowls of meaty and vegan-friendly ramen with house-made noodles alongside rotating weekly features, seasonal sides, salads, and desserts. If you're in the Nashville area and in West Nashville, go check out the Bearded Iris Brewing Company and let them know you heard about our channel, that you heard about their location on our channel. Anyway, like I said, more content to come. We'll try to get regional projections out maybe by lunch on Monday. If not, that'll probably come Tuesday. I'm Chris Lee for Southeastern 14, presented by Bearded Iris. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again soon.